Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Nader. In this video, we're going to go over a bunch of exercises to get more practice with the spread syntax in JavaScript together. This is a follow-up to the previous video for the spread syntax, so if you're new to that concept, definitely check that out. We're going to go over quite a few things together where we're going to go through arrays, object spreading, as well as kind of the concept of deep copies and how that might impact how we write our code. Let's get right into the exercises. All right, so I have a bunch of exercises here as I have done in the previous videos. I have a comment at the top of each exercise, so I'll go through that together with you, and I'll kind of read out each of the instructions and kind of give us a bit of preamble to set up, and then I'll give you a chance to do it yourself, and then we'll go through a possible solution together right after. So for this warm-up exercise, just to get our fingers warmed up, let's start by creating a variable called points that points to this array right here, no pun intended. Then we want to create another variable called points copy that creates a copy of this points array using the spread operator specifically, but also adds two extra values at the end, the number 50 and the number 75. And then we want to print out both of these arrays. So go ahead and try that out and then we'll go through it together. All right, so I'm going to create points and this is going to point to this array. I'll just copy it so you don't have to watch me type for too long. Then we want to create points copy, and this is going to be an array, but we want to spread out points and then add a couple values at the end. So we saw that we can do that using the dots operator, the 3 dots in a row, and then I can spread out points. So those come first, and then I want to add 50 and 75 to the end. So this is the same as kind of creating an empty array, looping 3 points, adding each one at a time, and then adding 50 and 75 at the end. So if I console.log out both points, and then I also log out points copy, let's take a look at what we get. So I'll just open up my terminal here on the side, make sure I'm in the correct folder, and I'll run node and then the warm-up exercise, and we can see that we have the points first, which is the one without the 50 and the 75, and then we have points copy here, which is the one below, which is the one with the 50 and the 75 added. Right, so very concise, neat syntax to actually get those added into a new array, which is a copy. Okay. Let's go to the first exercise. So for this one, we want to create a variable called views that points at this array. So note that this is an array of arrays, right? So there's 2 values inside of this outer array. Each of those values is itself an array with a bunch of numbers. Then we want to create a variable called views copy that creates a copy of views using the spread operator. So same thing that we just did. We want to print out both of these arrays. Then we want to add the number 40 to the end of the second array inside of views copy. Okay, so once we make the copy, we want to add 40 to the end of the copies version of this array. All right, then we also want to delete the last number, which is 20, inside the first array. Okay, and this is all working with the copied array. Then we want to add the array 100 and 200 to the end of views copy. So kind of adding a new array. So we'll have 3 items inside of the array. Again, working with copy. We want to print out both views and views copy. So keep note that the entire time after we spread out these values into views copy, all of these steps are using the copied array. Okay, we are not manipulating the original views array. So then once you actually see the printout of both the arrays views and views copy, try to explain what's actually happening, and hopefully that kind of makes sense. If not, you might want to watch the previous videos, and I won't give too much of a hint here, so maybe we'll look at the solution together after you give it a shot. All right, so for the solution for this, let's kind of take a look at what we got. So we want to create a views, and it's going to be this array right here. So again, an array of arrays, a 2-dimensional array. We want to create views copy. So I'll say views copy, and this is going to take views. It's going to spread it out. Perfect. And then we want to add the number 40 to the end of the second array inside of this copy. So we can't really do that all at once very easily. So let's just kind of do this as a separate step. So we're going to take views copy, and we want to take the second array, right, which is index 1. Okay, this might be some review from the arrays video if you haven't seen that, and this is confusing to you, definitely check that out. So the second array inside of this outer array is index 1, and we want to push 40 onto it, right? Perfect. So we want to do that. And then we want to delete the last number 20 inside of the first array. So we're going to say views copy, and the first item is 0, which is this one right here, except the copied version. And we want to delete the last item. So we know that we can use pop to actually get rid of the last item inside of an array in JavaScript. And that's just going to kind of remove the last item and return it back to us. We're not going to use that value. We're just going to kind of throw it away, but we can delete kind of an item easily that way. Then we want to add the array 100, 200 to the end of use copy. So again, we can kind of push that, but directly to the end of use copy. So I'm going to say use copy dot push. I'm going to push the entire array. My code just got reformatted when I saved it to the end of used copy, right? So I don't want to add it to the end of one of the inner arrays. I want to add it kind of right here. Okay, so that's what we're adding with 100 and 200. Perfect. Now I do want to note, if you use kind of another syntax to kind of do this, you might get some different results. I'm going to stick with push and pop, which manipulate arrays in place just to demonstrate what can happen. But there are other methods to kind of get things into an array and out of an array, and they might give you different results if you're trying to kind of get fancy with the syntax. So I'm going to go with the most basic syntax that does kind of array manipulations in place as we've learned together so far. Now, what we want to do is print out views and views copy and kind of check out what's happening and see if we can explain it. So I want to console.logout views, and I want to console.logout views copy, and kind of figure out if this is the expected behavior or not. So intuitively, we kind of, let's just look at this code real quick before we actually print it out. We have two arrays inside of here. We're spreading out two arrays inside of views copy. Great. So views copy is effectively going to look like this. Then inside of use copy, we're going to push 40 so that we're going to see 40, oops, right here at the end, 10, 20, 30, 40. We're going to pop off 20, so this is only going to be 5 and 10. Then we're going to add 100 and 200 to the end. So we kind of expect to see kind of 3 arrays inside of use copy and 2 arrays inside of views. And there's slightly different values inside of views copies because of all these manipulations that we're doing. So let's take a look if that's true. So I'm going to run node, I'm going to do exercise 1, and moment of truth. Okay. So kind of some strange behavior, a few things happening, right? This is the concept of shallow copying, and hence the kind of emphasis on manipulating arrays in place, so the same memory locations. What's actually happening here is these inner arrays are actually references to those arrays in JavaScript. They're not actually being copied. The only thing that actually gets copied when we use the spread syntax are the primitive value types, okay? Arrays, objects, and other reference types definitely do not get copied. They kind of get moved over only as references. So what that basically means for us is that changing one of those references is going to change anything that's pointing to that, whether it's in a spread in another object somewhere or another array somewhere, it's going to get changed in every single place because it only exists one time in memory and everything is just pointing to that. So a bit confusing of a concept. We covered it a bit more depth in the arrays and objects video, so check that out. So in this case, what we're saying is 5 and 10, right? Why do we have this in both of these, right? Why is 5 and 10 here in both view and view copy, right? That's coming from where? From here, right? View copy 0 pop, right? We are popping off 20 from view copy, but since they're both pointing to the same array, which is this one right here, it's actually popping it off of both, right? So this is actually the same array. This is not a copy. Same thing's happening here. When we're pushing 40, we're pushing it onto the same array in memory. It's not actually a copy, okay? However, what you'll notice is when we're pushing a new value onto views copy, 100 and 200, that does not get added to views because this is simply a totally brand new value that's being added purely to views copy. And now going forward, if anything was to try and copy this, for example, using spread, that would be by reference and it would manipulate both errors or both arrays. Sorry. I hope that makes sense. Definitely a bit of a confusing concept. Play around with these values, try to add stuff and remove stuff or make more copies for more practice. But this is kind of a demonstration of shallow copying with specifically the array spread syntax. Let's check out exercise 2. All right, so quite a bit going on here. For this one, we want to create a variable called animal that points at this object right here. So a bit of stuff going on in the object. Let me just quickly kind of walk through this. This object has a name property, which is a string koala, kingdom property, which is a string animal, or a cute property or key, which is true. Hopefully you agree that koalas are very cute. We have a friends property as well, and that is pointing to an array. Okay, this array right here. And this array has one item in it, which is an object. Okay, so this syntax is kind of crazy, right? Because we have kind of this outer object, and then we have this array, then we have another object, right? So quite a lot of what's called nesting going on here. So this array of friends, in this case, this koala only has one friend, in this case, which appears to be a kangaroo. So this inner object has a property name of name, and then a value of kangaroo, a property name of kingdom, with a string of Australia. All right, so a definitely more complex object, but hopefully nothing too crazy there for you. Then we want to create another variable called koala that points to a copy of animal using the spread operator for objects. And we also want to add the property tail of false to kind of this object right here, but inside of the copy. Okay. So we can use object spread and then add that value kind of all in one line. We want to print out both animal as well as koala, check them both out, see kind of which is in which. And now here comes the tricky part. We want to change cute to be false inside of animal, right? So the original animal object, we want to change this value to be false. Then we want to print out both animal and koala, which is the copy, to see kind of what value is what. And see if that makes sense to you. And then we also want to add a cute property initialized to be false. Sorry to the kangaroo lovers out there. I just wanted to do something different here. Inside of the kangaroo object, which is the first value inside of the friends array for animal, right? So we want to kind of grab this original animal object. We want to add a property here, which is cute of false. And then kind of see what's going on there when we print out both the animal and the koala. Okay, so a lot going on here. I struggled to word this. I hope that kind of makes sense. Do your best to kind of get through this one. This is definitely a more kind of complex example of shallow copies, hint, hint, just so you can get more practice specifically in the context of objects. So give it a shot and then we'll go through it together. All right. So let's go through it step by step. So create a variable called animal that points to this object. So I'm going to say const animal is equal to kind of this object. I'll just copy it so you don't have to, copy it so you don't have to watch me kind of write that whole thing out. Then we want to create a variable called koala that's basically a copy of this, right? So I'm going to say koala. And the easiest way to do this is kind of like this. We want to kind of spread out animal. So this is saying take all of the key value pairs inside of animal and basically move them over into koala, right? And then also we can add a new value of tail, which is going to be false. Okay, and we technically don't need quotes here because it's a single kind of, there's no spaces in it or special characters. All right, so that's step 2. Then we want to print out both of these. Take a look. So let's see what's up. So if we do console.log both animal, then we do console.log of koala. Let's see what we get. So I'll just pull up my terminal here, clear the terminal, run node exercise 2, and let's kind of investigate this. So this is the first object, right? So we have koala, Australia, cute is true. We have the friends array of one item. That kind of makes sense. Over here, now here is koala, right? The variable koala, which is the second thing I'm printing. Looks to be pretty much the same thing. Only difference is that now we have tail of false. Okay, so when we added tail, didn't change animal because we only added tail to this koala object, which is the copy. So that kind of makes sense, right? That's kind of how we would expect to use spread. This is a primitive type. We're kind of good to go. We're not kind of changing things in more than one place. Now the tricky part here is kind of steps 4 and 5. So let's take a look at that. We want to change cute to be false inside of animal. All right, so how do we do that? We're going to say animal.cute is now equal to false. Then we want to print out both animal and koala again. So I'm just going to copy that just so you don't have to sit and watch me type that out. I'm going to run this one more time, and I'm actually going to comment out these ones just so that my face doesn't get in the way, and run it one more time. All right. So what you'll notice here is that inside of animal, which is the first one right here, this first object that I have highlighted, cute has been changed to false, right? So animal.cute, which is this first object, cute is false. Koala.cute, which is the second object, which is the copy, has not been changed to false, right? It's still true, and it also has that new value that we added of tail of false. So does this make sense? Yes, it does, because false is a primitive type. We are not using it by reference. If we change it in one place, it's not going to change it in any other places. It just gets totally copied over. This is a totally different Boolean value than this Boolean value right here. They're in separate spaces in memory. We're totally fine. We're not changing things in two places. So let's see what happens with step 5. You can probably guess where this is going. We want to add a cube property initialized to be false inside of the kangaroo object inside of the friends array in animal. Wow, that's a mouthful, right? So that's basically saying inside of animal, which is this object, inside of friends, which is this array, inside of the first object of that array, which is this object right here, we want to add a cute property and initialize that to a value of false. Okay, so similar to how I have cute out here, we want this to have a cute right here of false because it currently doesn't have that. All right, so let's figure out how to do that. I'm going to comment these out as well. And the easiest way to do this is we want to go into animal. We want to grab the friends properties value, which is the array. So now we have access to the array. This array has one item in it. We want the first item, which is at index 0. Now that itself is an object, right? And to access values or change values or add values to an object, we can either use a dot operator or we can use square brackets and then a string. I'll use a dot operator just because it's kind of nicer syntax here. And we want to add the cute property. Okay, and we want to initialize this to be false. All right, so this is definitely quite a mouthful. It's definitely tricky to kind of figure out what's an array, what's an object. So kind of review that statement if it seems confusing to you and convince yourself what is an array and what is an object and how can we access those elements. Now what we want to do is console log out both of these again. And let's take a look at what we get. Okay, so check this out. Here we have as the first item, animal. All right, so we saw before cute has been changed to false. It doesn't have a tail. But oddly, if we look at the friends array with the single object in it, right? Or sorry, not oddly. This one makes sense. This one has cute of false. Okay, so that's good. That's good. This is actually what we want. Getting confused with which one's koala and which one's animal. This one right here, though, check this out, right? Everything here makes sense except for this thing. Friends of the first item in that array, which is this object, now also has a cute property of false, right? So we changed it both in this spot and in this spot. Why? Because of shallow copying, right? Arrays get shallow copied, objects get shallow copied, all the reference types get shallow copied. In this case, we have an array with an object in it. It doesn't change the fact that it is by reference and it's only in one place in memory. If we change either the array or the object inside of the array in any one spot in our program, anything pointing to that array or pointing to that object in the array is going to get changed throughout our code, no matter where it is. Okay, and this is because JavaScript saves memory, it saves computation by keeping it only in one spot because these objects can be huge, these arrays can be gigantic. Okay, so this is probably pretty complex. Definitely take a look through this and convince yourself that it kind of makes sense that changing that in one spot changes it in the other spot. Okay, but all the other values are okay in this case because they're primitive types and do get actually physically copied as new values inside of the objects. All right, let's go to exercise 3. So this one is quite a doozy. Definitely take your time with this one, but let's kind of read through it together. We want to start by creating a variable called superhero. Okay, and this is going to point to this object right here. Okay, so this object, I'll just kind of go through it real quick again, just like before. We have a name property of Bruce Wayne. We have an alias property of Batman, a universe property of DC, happy of false, and then enemies property, which is pointing to an array of strings. Okay, Joker, Catwoman, and Bane. And then we have a best movie property, which is pointing to an object, okay, itself with the properties of title, which is Dark Knight, and rating, which is 95. All right. So the question I have for you is, how would you create a copy of this object, this superhero object, including copies for both enemies, which is this array, and best movie, which is this object. So remember, by default, if we just spread this out, it is not a copy for those two values. It's only going to be a copy for name, alias, universe, and happy. Enemies and best movie by default spread would actually be references, not actual copies. Okay, so try to figure out how you might make copies of this. There are a lot of ways to do this, and I'll show you one way in this video. Once you've figured that out, or you think you figured it out, test it out, right? Once you've created a total copy, see if you can add the enemy Poison Ivy to the copies array of enemies, right? So whichever like superhero copy you end up making, add Poison Ivy to its array of enemies, and then add the year 2008 to the copy's best movie object, which is this one right here. So it'll have a third property, okay? So this should not manipulate the original superhero object. It should only change the copies object. So if you print out superhero, you want to make sure that the superhero's enemies and best movie were not modified. Okay, so go ahead and give that a shot. Keep in mind, this is definitely quite challenging. There's also ample methods to actually accomplish this. Don't fret if you kind of get stuck. We can look at the one possible solution together, but definitely give it a shot. It's very good practice. Okay, so let's take a look together. So let's start by kind of creating the superhero object. So we'll say const superhero. I'm just going to copy this again, just so you can not watch me type too much. And I'll format that using kind of my add-on that I have here. So here's our superhero, right? Name, alias, universe, happy. And here are the key things that we want to make sure that we're making copies of in our copy. Okay, so I'll do this incorrectly first, just to show you kind of what would go wrong and what we need to kind of fix. So the naive way to do this would be like superhero copy is equal to, right? And then we can actually, I'll just put this all in one line because we're not doing anything fancy here, and I'll just spread out superhero. Okay, and then if we want to add Poison Ivy to the array of enemies for only the copy, we would say superhero copy dot enemies dot push, and then we would push Poison Ivy. Okay, and if we want to add the year 2008 to the best movie only for the copy again, we would say superhero copy dot where is it? Best movie dot year is equal to 2008. Okay, now this is not going to work, and I'll show you why. So if I do a console log of superhero, and then I'll do a console log of superhero copy, let's take a look at what we get. I'll run node exercise3.js and check it out. So we have our two objects, this one here, and then this one here. However, Poison Ivy was added to the original superhero, and the year property was added to the original superhero as well. This is not what we wanted. Now these are the exact same. We did not actually just make a copy for enemies and best movie inside of our copy object. These are referring to the same array and referring to the same object. Okay. So I'll go through probably the simplest solution that I can think of, also using the spread operator. There are many other solutions for this, but I'll just show you one. So I'm just going to split this up onto different lines. So I'm going to say, kind of like this, I'm going to spread out superhero. Okay. Now this is going to include the copies. All right. We saw in the spread syntax video that we can actually take these key value pairs and add duplicates after the spread, right? So if we have a duplicate key, depending on if it comes before the spread or after the spread, we can actually overwrite things. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to overwrite enemies, and I'm going to say that the enemies is actually going to be a spread of the superhero.enemies. Now this looks really confusing, right? So what is happening here? Let's just kind of look at this single line, because there's a lot actually happening in this line. We've spread out every single property, which is every single one of these inside of this object so far. So we have a name, alias, universe, happy, enemies, and best movie. What we're saying here on line 31 in my case is we're saying kind of add a property called enemies, but we already have one, right? But this will overwrite it with this value. So what is this value? Well, we're saying create a new array that is a spread of whatever this array has in it. Well, what's this array? This is superheroes.enemies. So we're saying take this array and spread it into this array right here, which is the new array that we're creating. And since everything inside of this array is a primitive type, notably strings, this is actually going to work just fine. So we're actually going to create a copy here, just like we normally would with the spread syntax, because everything inside of that array is a primitive type. All right, so let's do the same thing for best movie. So if I do best movie, what I want to do is I want to kind of spread this into an object. Okay, and what do I want to spread out? Well, I want to spread out everything inside of superhero, just like that. But I do also want to add a new value to both of these, right? So before I do that, let's just take a look at kind of what this syntax is doing. Superhero dot best movie is what I meant to say. We're saying kind of the same thing here, right? Create an object and spread out superhero.bestmovie. Well, what's superhero.bestmovie? It's this object right here. So we're creating a new object that has a title and a rating. And since these title and rating are primitive types for their values, a string and a number respectively, this is actually going to be a copy here, right? Just like we normally would if we were to spread out an object. And since the key for that property name matches the one that we already spread out previously, it's actually going to overwrite the one that has a reference in it from before. So here we have the reference. Now we're overriding these two with kind of these new values, which are actual copies instead of references. All right. How do we add Poison Ivy and 2008? Well, hopefully you can see how that might work now, right? I can add Poison Ivy right here, right? I can spread out the enemies and add Poison Ivy to the end. And I can also add this new property right here too, right? I can say year of 2008, right? This, if you look at it in isolation, hopefully it makes more sense because we're spreading out an array and we're adding a new string. Here, if you look at it in isolation, we're spreading out an object and then we're adding a new key value pair, just like we normally would with spread syntax. All right, so let me save that and let's take a look at what we get. So what we want to see is we want to see superhero copy have copy values for enemies in best movie. So we don't actually want to see Poison Ivy inside of enemies for superhero, and we don't want to see year 2008 inside of best movie for a superhero. So let's see if that's true and check it out, right? You can see that in our original superhero object, we only have Joker, Catwoman, and Bane, right? But inside of our copy, right, we have Poison Ivy added, right? And similarly, inside our superhero's best movie, we only have a title and rating, but inside of our superhero copy, we have a title, rating, and then our year that we added. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, there's many ways to do this. This is probably the most concise way, but it does require kind of an intimate knowledge of how this object is actually set up. So there are other ways that you can do this that might, if you don't know the structure of the object, this kind of method doesn't work as well. But since we did know the structure, this is probably the easiest way to kind of look at it, in my opinion, instead of doing things like loops or creating objects, which is also a totally valid option. So I hope that makes sense. Definitely review this if it seems confusing, because this is quite a lot going on, a very complex example. So I hope you found these exercises valuable and challenging enough to kind of pique your curiosity and challenge your brain. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to go over a similar kind of time and space saving syntax called the destructuring kind of syntax or destructuring operator. And it's going to help us kind of reduce a lot of the code and make it a bit more readable as well. So if you did find this particular set of exercises valuable, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to also hear in the comments what you thought of these exercises. Were they too challenging? Were they too easy, too hard? And kind of, do you actually see yourself using these concepts in real life as you're actually working on your own JavaScript projects? So I can't actually wait to get to the destructuring video. I have a whole bunch of stuff to go through with you in that one and its own series of exercises as well. So I'll see you in that video.